Groups are a funny thing, aren't they? On one hand, they can make us feel powerful, brave, part of something bigger. But on the other hand, they can lead us down some pretty dark paths. It's this huge paradox of being human. How can getting together with other people bring out both our absolute best and our absolute worst? We're going to dive into the psychology behind all of it, and we'll start with what happens when all eyes are on you. So let me ask you this. Think about it for a sec. Playing a guitar, giving a presentation, even just cooking a meal. When people are watching you, do you shine or do you kind of crumble under the pressure? It seems like a simple question, but this very idea is literally where the entire field of social psychology got its start. All right, so let's kick things off by looking at what happens when you are on stage, so to speak, when you are the center of a group's attention. What's actually going on in our brains when we have to perform? So the core concept we're talking about is called social facilitation. And get this, the very first social psychology experiment ever, way back in 1898, was about this exact thing. A guy named Triplett noticed that cyclists were faster when they were racing against other people, not just against the clock. So he brought kids into his lab, had them reel in fishing lines, and saw the same thing. They were faster when another kid was right there next to them. But here's the twist. Other studies found the complete opposite, that an audience could totally tank someone's performance. So what gives? This right here, this is the brilliant theory from psychologist Robert Zions that solved the puzzle. He argued that just having other people around jacks up our physiological arousal. Your heart beats a little faster. And that arousal kicks our dominant response into overdrive. Now, what's a dominant response? It's just what you're most likely to do. If the task is easy or something you've practiced a million times, your dominant response is to do it right. So you get there. But if the task is new or really complex, your dominant response is probably, well, to mess up. And that's when your performance suffers. And if you're thinking, okay, that makes sense for people, hold on to your hats. Zayant tested this theory on cockroaches. Yes, cockroaches. He built them a tiny maze. When the goal was simple, just run straight down a tube to escape a light, they did it faster when other little roaches were watching them from a clear audience box. But when he made the maze complex with a turn, the audience made them slower. The pressure got to them, and they kept trying to do their dominant response, which was just to run straight. It's incredible. And here we see the exact same thing in humans, just without the mazes. Look at this data. When people had to do a super well-learned task, just taking off and putting on their own shoes, they were faster when someone was watching. But when they had to do a new, clunky task, fiddling with unfamiliar lab shoes and a coat, the audience slowed them down. So the takeaway is huge. An audience doesn't just make you better or worse. It just amplifies you. Okay, so that's what happens when you're being watched by the crowd. But what about when you become part of the crowd? What happens when your own identity starts to fade and you're just one of many? Let's switch gears and see what happens when we go from being the performer to just being part of the audience. This brings us to a concept that's pretty much the mirror image of what we just talked about. With social facilitation, you're under the spotlight, right? You know you're being judged, and that amps you up. But with this new idea, social loafing, you're anonymous, you're hidden. No one can see how much effort you're putting in, so the pressure is off. This image of a tug of war says it all, doesn't it? When you're pulling a rope by yourself, you're giving it everything you've got. But when you're on a big team and nobody can really tell how hard you're pulling, well, there's a natural tendency to ease up a little. We've all seen this in group projects at school or work, right? Someone always seems to just coast along. Now let's take this idea one step further, because it can get much more intense. When that feeling of anonymity gets really strong and you feel like you're not accountable for your actions, something called de-individuation can happen. This is more than just getting a little lazy. It's when you actually start to lose your sense of individual identity. Your personal moral compass starts to fade, and you become way more likely to just go along with whatever the group is doing, whether that's good or bad. This is the root of mob mentality. And that idea of just conforming to the group, that leads us to one of the most dangerous traps in all of psychology, especially when a group has to make a big decision together. I mean, this cartoon is just perfect because we have all been in this room. Everyone's raising their hand, but in their heads, they're thinking, this is a disaster, or this is never going to work. It's that silent, powerful pressure to just agree, to not be the one to make waves. And there's a name for this, groupthink. It's what happens when a group, especially a close-knit one, cares more about harmony than about making the right call. The desire to reach a consensus becomes so overwhelming that it just shuts down any real debate or critical thinking. And make no mistake, this isn't just about a bad meeting at the office. Groupthink has been identified as a key factor in some of the biggest disasters in history. The Bay of Pigs invasion, the escalation of the Vietnam War, even the failure to prepare for the attack on Pearl Harbor, despite warnings. In each case, smart people in a room together made a catastrophic decision because nobody was willing to speak up against the group's momentum. This model basically shows the recipe for a groupthink disaster. You start with the wrong ingredients, a group that's already really cohesive, a very directive leader who makes their opinion known, and a super high-stress situation. What does that cook up? All these symptoms, like people censoring their own doubts and creating this illusion of unanimity where it looks like everyone agrees. And the final dish is always the same, a defective, often terrible decision. So if groupthink is this dangerous downward spiral, how do we stop it? Is it inevitable? Well, the good news is it's not. There are some very clear, practical ways to break that pressure for consensus. So here's your toolkit. 4 simple but powerful things. First, if you're the leader, keep your opinion to yourself at the beginning. Just let people talk freely. Second, actively bring in outside opinions. Don't let the group become an echo chamber. Third, and this one is my favorite, officially assign someone to be the devil's advocate. Their only job is to argue against the popular opinion. And fourth, always have a backup plan. It forces everyone to admit the first plan might not be perfect. And here's one more related trap to be aware of. It's called group polarization. Now, you'd think that when a group discusses an issue, they'd move toward the middle, right? Toward a compromise. But what research shows is that often the exact opposite happens. Discussion actually makes the group's average opinion become even more extreme in the direction they were already leaning. Okay, for our final piece of the puzzle, we have to talk about power, because you can't really understand how groups work without understanding that within almost every group, some people have more power than others, and that power fundamentally changes the way we behave. So that leads us to this massive question. When people get a taste of power or authority, does it change them? Does it actually make it harder for them to see things from other people's points of view? Does it chip away at empathy? This experiment is so clever. It's just fantastic. Researchers made some people feel powerful and others feel powerless. Then they gave them all a really simple task. Draw the letter E on your forehead. Now, think about that. To make the E readable to the person looking at you, you have to draw it backward from your own perspective. You have to take their point of view. And the results were stunning. The low-power participants, far more likely to draw the E so the other person could read it. The high-power group, they were much more likely to draw it the right way for themselves, so it was backward to everyone else. It's such a simple, clear demonstration of how power can make us turn inward. So as we wrap all this up, the question really comes back to you. We've seen how an audience can literally change how well we perform, having anonymous in a group can make us lazy or even reckless, and how power can make us forget what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. Knowing all of this, what are you going to do with it? The next time you're in a group, in a meeting, will you be the one to just nod along and keep things comfortable? Or will you be the one with the courage to break the consensus and ask the hard questions?